Welcome to Preparing for the ACT 2021-2022, the math portion, part 2. If you know which question you want to look at in particular, find that in the description or in the progress bar. So let's start with number 16. So it asks what value of x satisfies the equation, and we have this equation right here. So what we have to do is we have to multiply in the negative 3, and we have to multiply in the 2 into these quantities. So we get negative 12x plus 15. A lot of people forget that we have a negative here and a negative here. So that means when we multiply, we get a positive. Then we have 2 times 1, that's 2, and then 2 times negative 5x is minus 10x. Now, what we want is we want to get this and this, these like terms, on the same side. So to do that, we're going to add 12x to both sides. And when we do, we have 15 equals 2 plus 2x. And now I'm going to subtract the 2. So we have 13 equals 2x. And then finally, we divide both sides by 2. And so we get 13 over 2 equals our x value. Number 17. In the right triangle ABC shown below, the given lengths are in millimeters. What is sine of A? Now, sine is one of the 3 trig ratios that you first learn in geometry. And the mnemonic device that you often use is SOH CAH TOA. And so this is for us to remember what is sine, cosine, and tangent. And so since we are using sine, we want SOHCAHTOA. So we want so that's sine. Then we have opposite over hypotenuse. So what we have to do is we have to state, all right, what is the opposite and what is the hypotenuse? So here we have our right triangle, and angle A is right here. Now this is important because angle A decides what is the opposite side, because the opposite is what is opposite the angle. So over here, this is opposite. And 9 is the hypotenuse because it is the longest. So we want to divide these two numbers to get our sine ratio. So sine of A is 7 over 9, and that's why letter D is the answer. Number 18. Here we have 27 over 64 to the negative 2 over 3. Now, if you have a calculator, you probably reached for that and typed it in. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. The thing you have to realize, though, is you have to be sure that the calculator understands that this whole thing, the whole negative 2/3, is an exponent. So here's how you should have typed it in. So parentheses, 27 divided by 64, close the parentheses. Then use the caret. Now, you need to put this whole thing in parentheses to understand that this whole thing is an exponent. Negative 2 divided by 3. That's how you have to enter in this in order for the calculator to understand what it is you're trying to do. Now, when you do that, you get 1.7 repeating. Now, because it's 1.7, it's a positive, so that means we can get rid of F and G, and it's bigger than 1, so we can get rid of H. So now the question is it J or is it K? And if you use your calculator, 16 over 9 is about 1.7, and 32 divided by 9 is 3.5, and that's repeating, and that's repeating. So that's one way to calculate this. Now, what if you didn't have a calculator and you had to do this one by hand? Because this the whole ACT can be done without it. Some people choose not to, but it can be done. So how do you do this? Well, what we do is we take the entire exponent, -2/3, and we break it up into multiple exponents. And we do it like this. 27/64. And first we raise it to the first, and then on top of that, we raise it to the 1/3, and then outside of that, we square it. And what we do is we work from the inside out. So what does this -1 exponent do? This takes the reciprocal. So then what about the 1/3? That is the cube root. And then the last one, the 2, well, that's just squaring it. So if we do the first thing, we take the reciprocal, that means we just take the fraction and we flip it. So now we still have to the 1/3, and then on top of that, we are still squaring it. So now, we want to take the cube root. So we take the cube root of 64 on top and the cube root of 27 down below. Now we're still squaring this thing, but I want to simplify it. And so can we take the cube root of 64? Well, we want a number times itself to get 64. Well, that is going to be 4. And then same thing for 27. A number times itself to get 27, that is 3. So that equals 4/3, and we're squaring it, which means we get 4 squared over 3 squared, and that is 16/9. So whether you did it by calculator or whether you did it by hand, those are the reasons why J is the answer. Number 19, Loto begins at his back door and walks 8 yards east, 6 yards north, 12 yards east, and 5 yards north to the barn door. About how many yards less would he walk if we could walk directly from the back door to the barn door? All right. So, let's recall our 4 cardinal directions. So we got north, south, east, and west. So first he travels 8 yards east. Then he travels 6 yards north. Then he travels another 12 yards east, and then another 5 yards north. So the question is, well, what would be the straight line distance from one spot to the other? And so the way we can think about this, is to say, all right, how many total yards did he travel going this way? Well, in total, he went 20 yards. And then here to here, his total was 11 yards. So I can redraw this over here. And so we've got 20 and 11. And so if we want the straight line distance, well, 20 and 11, those meet at a right angle. So that means we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find out this length. So 11 squared plus 20 squared equals, well, we don't know the hypotenuse, that's just c squared. So we'll just reach for my calculator. 11 squared plus 20 squared. That's going to be 521 equals c squared. So that means c is approximately, we'll take the square root of that, 22.8. Now, that's not the answer, though, because the question asks, how many yards less would he walk if he could walk directly? So then the question is, how many yards did he walk? Well, to answer this, what we have to do is we have to take 8 plus 6 plus 12 plus 5. Now, instead of adding these as they are written, what I suggest you do is pair them up like this. 8 and 12 make 20. 6 and 5 make up 11. So he walked a total of 31 yards. Now, if he walked in a straight line, that is in red, he would have gone about 22.8. Well, let's round that to about 23. So if we take 31 minus 23, we get the 8 yards. That's how much shorter he walked. So number 20. For this one, the key thing is that we are given this formula right here. And what they've given us is they've given us these numbers are equal to these different characters. And if you don't know what they are, that's okay. You don't need to know them. All we need to know is we've got a formula and we have these numbers to plug into our formula. So let's see. In this formula, z is 2. X, they don't give us. This letter right here is called mu, which is 78. All over, this is a little sigma, but you don't need to know that, is 6. So what we're doing is we're asking, what is x? Because that's what we're asked to solve for. So to get x by itself, I'm going to multiply the 6 over. So we have 12 equals x minus 78. And then we're going to add 78. And we get 90 is our value for x. So that's why the answer is letter F. Number 21. So all these points, A, B, C, D, are on the circle. So the question is, which of the following does not appear in the figure? So what we have to do is we have to do some elimination. So does an acute triangle exist? Well, actually an acute triangle does. How do we know that? Well, these two, from the center out to point A and the center out to point B, those are equal, which means these angles are equal. Now, 60 degrees has already been taken, so these other two have to add up to 120. So as it turns out, these are also 60. Now, by definition, that's an acute triangle because none of the angles are over 90 degrees. So cross off letter A because that's an acute triangle. It's also an equilateral triangle because when all the angles are the same, then all the sides are the same. Now, what about a right triangle? Well, we see that. But what about an isosceles? Well, that's true too, because all four of these, from the center out, from OA, OB, OC, and OD, they're all the same because they are all radii of a circle. And so they are all the same. So that right there is an isosceles triangle. So this right here is A and B, and this right here is C and D. So the one triangle we don't see is a scalene triangle. Number 22, what is the slope of a line that is parallel? So the key word here is parallel, which means same slope. So what we have to do here is find the slope of this. And the way we find the slope is we solve for y. By doing that, that gets us into slope-intercept form. So we subtract x. So we have 5y equals negative x plus 9. And then we divide everything by 5. So we have negative x over 5 equal plus 9 over 5. Now, the slope is the number in front of x, but it's very hard to see a number in front of x here. And so what I often recommend is don't write it like this. Instead, take the x away, and what's left? Well, you have a negative 1 on top and a 5. Plus 9/5. And so this right here, that is your slope. And since it's the same slope, that is the answer that we are looking for. So the answer is letter G. All right, 23. Given this formula, y equals x over x minus 1, and x is greater than 1, which of the following is a possible value of y? All right. So we can start trying different numbers here and seeing what works. So let's say that x equals 2. Well, that means y is equal to 2 over 1. What about if x is 3? Well, then y is going to equal 3 over 2, 0.5. What if x is 4? Y is going to equal 4 over 3, 1.3. If x equals 5, y is going to equal 5 over 4. Now, one thing you're going to notice is that all our answers are all fractions. Now, that's not surprising because our formula itself was a fraction. But the top is 1 bigger than the bottom. That's a key thing to note here. And so because the top is going to be 1 bigger than the bottom, that means letter D can't work. Because in order to be less than 1, the bottom would have to be bigger. Now, they also said that x is bigger than 1. And so that means the top and the bottom are always going to be positive. So A and B are gone, as well as letter C. And so letter E is the only answer that works. Now, 1.9 happens somewhere in here. Now, some make the objection, well, x can't be in there because we've got 2 and we've got 3. Well, you made an assumption, and your assumption is that x has to be a whole number. It doesn't say that. It just says x has to be equal to 1. So it is quite possible that x could be something like 1.5, or x could be 2.1. Those are possible values. As long as they're bigger than 1, they fit. So 1.9 is the only possible value here that works. Next one, 24. The set of all positive integers that are divisible by both 15 and 35 is infinite. What is the least positive integer in this set? So we want the lowest number. So what we're going to do is we're going to start here. We're going to start with the lowest number and start testing them. So, how do we test if it's divisible by both 15 and 35? We take that number and we ask, sorry about that. Yep, that is correct. So the question is, are these both whole numbers? In this case, nope and no. So we move on. Next one. 50 over 15. Nope. 50 over 35. No, that is not. Next. 105 over 15. 105 over 35. That, I believe, does work. 105 over 15 is 7, and 105 over 35 is 3. So 105 is divisible by both 15 and 35. Now 210 and 525 also work, but what we want is we want the least. And so the least in this list is letter H. Number 25. Here we have triangle ABC. The measure of angle A is 58 degrees, and we're given that sides AB and AC are congruent. Now what that means is that this is an isosceles triangle, but that also means that this angle here and this angle here are also congruent. So these angles have to be the same. So whatever this angle is, letter C, that same angle has to be for letter B, and then it has to add up to 58. It has to add up with 58, to 180 degrees. So an algebraic way you can do this is like this. We can say x plus 58 equals 180. 2x plus 58 equals 180. So we subtract 58. So when we take 180 minus 58, we get 122 equal to 2x. And then we divide by 2, and we get 61. All right. Now, there's an alternative way if you didn't want to think that way. The other way is to say, all right, well, 58 is just part of the triangle. But what if we try this angle? Try 58 plus 58. What if we add those up? Do we get 180? Because in a triangle, all the angles have to be 180. We get 174. Well, that's too small. So we know that one doesn't work, but these other smaller angles won't work either. So now, let's try. Let's try this. So we had 58, and then we had 61 twice, and we do indeed get 180 degrees. So that's another way you could have guessed and tried out different answers. Notice here that I started with the middle one. I started in the previous one with the low number because we started with the least. But here, we started with the middle, and by eliminating the middle, we also eliminated A and B also. All right, 26. Now for this problem, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up this number. And I'm going to cover up this number. Because the scientific notation, I'm noticing, messes up a lot of students, and they tend to sort of miss the point. So we have a certain amount of square kilometers of Earth's surface is land. The rest is water. So the problem says, if a returning space capsule lands at random point on the Earth, which of the following is the best estimate of the probability that the space capsule will land in water? So what do we want? We want that the space capsule lands in water. So now we have two pieces of information that we've covered up. The amount of surface that is land and the amount of surface that is water. Now, in order to get the probability, we're going to need the amount of surface that is water, but we're also going to need the total surface of the Earth. And we're going to get that by adding up the surface that's land and the surface that is water. Now, to get the probability, we get that by taking the surface that is water, we divide by the total surface. So now at this point, I'm going to uncover these two numbers. So land surface, land area is 1.48 times 10 to the 8th. Surface that is water is 3.63 times 10 to the 8th. So what I need to do is I need to add these two up. Now because they are the same surface area, because they are the same in scientific notation, that's going to be the same down here, times 10 to the 8th. So then I take 1.48 and then 3.63, and we get 5.11. So now I'm going to divide the surface that is water, 3.63 times 10 to the 8th, and I'm going to divide that by the total surface of the Earth. And because I'm dividing, these two cancel out. So what we are left with is just 3.63 divided by 5.11, and we get as a decimal 0.710, and as a percent that turns into about 71%. So that is why the answer for 26 is letter G. 27. On the first 7 stats tests, Jamal scored 61, 76, 79, 80, 80, 84, and 91. The mean, median, and mode were 79, 80, and 80 respectively. All right, so let's take a second and remind ourselves. Mean equals average. And if you look in the instructions, they'll make mention of that. The median, let's use a different color. The median is the middle number. And then finally the mode is the most recurring. So they've already averaged out the numbers and got 79. The middle number is 80, and the number that occurs most often is also 80. So on his 8th statistics test, Jamal scored a 90. How did the mean, median, and mode of all 8 of his scores compare? So what we need to do is we need to take 90 and plug that into the list. Now that's going to go right in here. So I'm going to go down here and rewrite these numbers. 61. Now what's nice is in this problem the numbers are in order. 79, 80, 80, 84, 90, and 91. Okay, so now the question is, all right, how do they change? Well, of the three, the easiest one to find is the mode, because 80 is the only one that shows up most often. Now that hasn't changed. It was 80 before and it's 80 now. So right off the bat we can eliminate letter A, letter B, and letter D, because what we want is we want the mode to be equal. Now if we notice with our answers that are left, for the mean they're both greater. So looking at the average isn't going to help us. Instead, we have to look to the median. Now, when we have numbers in a list like this, what I always tell people is cross them off, biggest and smallest, until you're down to 1 or 2. And in this case, we're down to just 2. And when you have 2, what you ask yourself is, what is the number right in the middle? Well, they're both 80. So that means the median here is also 80. Now if we look before, it was 80 also, and now it's 80 again. So that is unchanged. So because the median and the mode are equal, that explains why the answer is letter E. 28. So we have this solid rectangular prism was built by alternating black cubes and white cubes, such that 2 cubes of the same color have at most one edge touching. So it kind of looks like a 3D checkerboard. So what is the total number of white cubes that were used to build the prism? All right. So let's look at this top row. How many white cubes are here? 3. How many white cubes are here? 4. How many white cubes are here? 3, 4, 3. So all in all, in this top row, we have 17. Now, let's go to the second row and let's start counting them. Now, in this first row, we're going to have 4. And then we're going to have 3, because it'll go dark, light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. And so if you're noticing, they seem to go in this alternating pattern. So here we have 4, 3, 4, 3, 4, and that total is 18. So that's 2 of the rows. So how many are going to be in this row? Well, if you notice, this row, and this row, they all have the same face. So it stands to reason that this row should also have 17, and this row should also have 17. And then likewise, this row, and this row, they all have the same front face as well. So that means this should have 18, and this should have 18. So to get the total, we take 17 times 3, and 17 times 3 is 51. And then we take 18 times 3, and that is 54. We add them together, and we get 105. So that is the number of white cubes in this prism. Number 29. One side of a square ABCD has a length of 12 meters. A certain rectangle whose area is equal has a width of 8. What is the length of the rectangle? So let's draw this picture. All right, so we've got our square, and it says it has a length of 12. Well, since it's a square, it's a length of 12 all around, and so it has an area of 144. So now, when we draw our rectangle, it's going to be not as narrow. There we go. Now, one side is 8, but we know it has the same area. So we want the length. Well, 8 times L equals 144. So we take 144 and divide by 8, and that's going to give us 18 for our length. Number 30. The average for a list of numbers is 92. A new list of 4 numbers has the same first 3 numbers, but the 4th number is 40 in the original list, and the 4th number in the new list is 48. What is the average of the new list of numbers? So we have 3 numbers, A plus B plus C plus 40, and if we divide them all by 4, we get 92. Now the question is A plus B plus C. Those are our unknown numbers that the problem isn't telling us. Plus 48. We divide that by 4. We're going to get question mark. Now what we can do is we say we don't know the numbers individually, but we can treat them as a group. And we can solve to get this by itself. So if I multiply the 4 over, 92 times 4 is 368. So that's what these 4 numbers add up to. Now when I subtract 40, I get A plus B plus C equals 328. So whatever the numbers are, they have to add up to 328. Well, now we can put that up here, in place of A, B, and C. So we take 328 plus 48 and divide by 4. And when we do, we get 94. So that's one way to do this problem. The other way to do this is to say, well, if 40 went up to 48, well, what's going to happen to the average? The average went up by 2. Now, why? Well, that's because one of the 4 numbers went up by 8. All the other 3 stayed the same, so we had to spread that out over all 4 numbers. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. So one number went up by 8, but when we average it out over 4 numbers, it averages out to 2. So that's another way, a little more intuitive way of thinking about it, if you prefer. And 31. The vector I represents 1 mile per hour east, and the vector j represents 1 mile per hour north. So this is j, and this is I. One of the following vectors represents Maria's velocity in miles per hour because she jogs south at 12. So the question is, how do we write this? Well, this is going in the opposite direction of north. So because it's opposite, it's negative 12j. Because it's 12 times as big, but it's going in the opposite direction. So that's why the answer is letter B. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out all the other videos on this channel, and if you have any questions, type them in the comments section below.